Welcome to How Do They Afford That, the podcast that peeks into the financial lives of everyday Australians. I'm Michael Thompson. I'm a writer and the co-host of the podcast Fear and Greed Business News. As always, I'm with Canna Campbell, financial planner and founder of Sugar Mama TV, the financial literacy platform that is literally everywhere. YouTube, podcast, books, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, and more. Hello, Canna.
Good morning, Michael.
Now, Canna, today's an interesting episode. It's a very exciting one because it is very much a podcast for now. It is something big happening at the moment because every working Australian got a tax cut on the 1st of July, which is quite a momentous occasion, really. It isn't something that happens very often, and the scale of the cut, of course, varies depending on what you're earning. But what doesn't change is the fact that this is an opportunity to do something about your financial future. Do you use the money to kind of bump up your super? Do you clear out debt? Do you save it? Do you invest somewhere else? Do you whack it under the mattress or something?
There are so many different options. We need to work out what is the best for our listeners.
I think we can safely rule out putting it under your mattress, though.
Do not ever take financial advice from Michael.
No.
Please, when listening to this episode or any other episode on How to They Afford That.
That is a very, very good disclaimer. There are a lot of options, though, as you say. And so we have an expert in the studio today to help us out. Jessica Louie is a senior private client advisor at UniSuper, a supporter of this podcast. Jessica, welcome to How Do They Afford That?
Morning, Michael. Morning, Canna.
Now, I am really looking forward to talking to you because I know that Canna is, because she's just been jumping out of her seat today about the potential to talk about superannuation and about salary sacrificing into super, which is, we will get to that in just a moment, because I know that is something, Jessica, that you're passionate about as well. And I know that I'm in trouble now. The two of you will just kind of end up chatting for the full time about superannuation and salary sacrificing and all of that. And I'll just kind of take a moment to duck outside and make a cup of tea. But before we do get into it, we need to make it clear that as you're listening, please know that anything we talk about is always general in nature. It is never personal, investment, strategic, or product advice. It is purely for financial education purposes only.
That's right. We don't know anything about your financial situation, your goals, your aspirations, and what your risk profile might be. So please always bear that in mind and know this is in general in nature and educational purposes only.
Now, before we get into it, Jessica, and I'll let Canna ask the first question, which is it's a high risk thing because I may not get another question in. It's a good idea to kind of get an understanding of the scale of these tax cuts, isn't it? Because from what I could see, a person earning, say, $50,000 will get about $930, $929 thereabouts annual tax cut, which works out to be just a touch under $18 a week. Someone earning $100,000 will get an extra $2,179 a year, or just a little under $42 a week. And then you kind of, as you get up into some of those higher tax brackets, someone earning, say, more than $190,000 will collect an additional $4,529 annually. But all the way up, these are not insignificant numbers. So it's definitely kind of a case of let's talk about this now and figure out what to do.
Jessica, so you spend your days talking to the UniSuper members about their superannuation and their financial goals and dreams. How are you explaining and advising about how incredibly important these tax cuts are to perhaps make up for lost time, or to get back on track, or even to potentially get ahead of the game? Like, what is your advice? What are you explaining to your members?
Sure. Well, Canna, I think the first thing just to point out is, when else do we actually get a pay rise without even asking? So on the 1st of July, that's actually what happened, thanks to the government. And unlike other tax cuts that we've had in the past, these ones will actually hit your bank account straight away. So there's no waiting to the end of the financial year, lodging your tax return and then getting this big lump sum back. So the opportunity for people to actually do something meaningful with this extra money can take effect right now. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity to have a think about what you can do with this money to really secure your financial future. But I do also want to acknowledge that for some, this extra little bit of money will go straight to covering the basics just to survive in light of the cost of living pressures. But however, for those that can, I think it's a good idea to think about the different things you can do so that you don't succumb to lifestyle creep. So, look, the first thing is you can salary sacrifice into super. And before we get into the details, I'd just like to take a step back and talk about why super is so important and why it's important to assess your super at every stage of your life.
Oh, Jessica, you are speaking Canna's language right now.
I just think to myself, I like what I'm hearing. I like the way Jessica thinks.
As soon as you said how important superannuation is, like she actually just kind of just drifted back a little bit in the seat. You took it to a very happy place just then. So please keep going.
So, look, the reason why super is so important is that for most people, super will be their second largest financial asset aside from their family home.
Mm-hmm.
So for some, it may actually even be their largest. So it really does make sense to give something that's so valuable the attention that it deserves. Then if we fast forward and think about the bigger picture, the purpose of superannuation is to support our retirement lifestyle. So what we do now, and if we've got a runway of 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, it can really make a difference to being able to retire with choices or being able to retire and just afford the basics. And for most, they do aspire to having choices when they retire.
Well, in that case, I mean, I think that it's clear that you need to make some decisions now. I mean, it's not worth kind of putting it off and putting it off and putting it off because there are significant financial benefits to actually getting involved and getting active in this early on. So, which is really the point of this today then. And let's start then with salary sacrificing into your super. Now, Jessica, I'm sorry to do this to you because you are an expert in this space. Canna is also an expert in this space. I am not an expert in this space. In absolute layman's terms, can you please explain how salary sacrificing works?
Happy to. But Michael, before I explain how salary sacrifice works, it might just be helpful to think about the benefits of salary sacrifice, because if we think about the benefits, that's really going to motivate us to actually take action. And I think there's an old saying that a good plan executed today is far better than a perfect plan executed in the future. And so that's really what we're talking about.
We love a good quote on how do they afford that.
Oh, that's a good one. I'm going to write that down. I will likely use that again. And unfortunately, Jessica, I will never credit you. I will say it's my own original work.
Well, actually, I have to give credit to my husband because it's something that he says all the time. So he's very much about taking action, and maybe that's because he spent 11 years in the Navy. I don't know. I'm sure that was ingrained into him.
I love, though, that you weren't going to credit him, though, initially until I threatened to take credit for it myself. Sorry, go on. Please go on.
So if we think about the benefits of salary sacrifice, they're really twofold. So firstly, salary sacrificing into super is tax effective. So it means that you'll actually end up paying less tax. And then secondly, it's a regular automatic savings plan to boost your retirement nest egg so that you can achieve financial freedom. So I think that's a really important point. Think about how this change could benefit you in the long term. So for example, if I salary sacrifice X amount into super for the next 20 years, that means I'm going to be X amount better off at retirement. I can afford to spend this much more money. And this is actually the lifestyle that having this much more money is going to afford me.
So if we use then, Jessica, as an example, when I was going through kind of those different kind of pay rates and someone earning $50,000 and someone earning $100,000, let's say just for ease of kind of figuring this out, that someone earning $100,000 and they are getting essentially an extra $41.90 per week, that we are talking about kind of just putting that $41.90 into superannuation before it is taxed. It never even kind of touches your pocket. It never goes into your bank account. And so therefore it actually reduces your taxable income further. Have I butchered this?
No, you've got that exactly right. And you might even see an increase in your take-home pay because you're actually paying less tax. And salary sacrifice is really easy to put in place because it's an arrangement between you and your employer where your employer just siphons off that amount each week or per fortnight or month or however frequently they pay your super contributions. And so if it's not coming into your bank account, then there's not going to be a risk of you spending it. So, that's one of the other great things about salary sacrificing into super. It's that enforced savings plan. And think about the benefits of compound interest. Those small differences over a long period of time can really make such a big impact.
And it's just hands off, isn't it? That way,
It is,
if
set
it's
and
just
forget.
yeah, which I might be biased, but I like anything that I don't have to do. Like if I can just kind of set it and it will continue that way. And so the starting point is just to talk to your employer about this.
So I think, talking to your employer, I guess, is the implementation phase, but we would always recommend that you seek advice. So if you work with a financial advisor, they would be in a fantastic position to actually recommend, whether you should or shouldn't, how much you should salary sacrifice, and explain the benefits to you.
Yeah.
If you don't have a financial advisor, the great thing is a lot of super funds do offer that financial advice service that can help you with limited advice like a contribution strategy. And generally, it's very cost effective to speak to your super fund.
Jessica, do you have any sort of general rules of thumb as to when or who a salary sacrificing strategy would be most beneficial? Such as, someone approaching retirement, or maybe someone who's just entered the workforce. Is there a kind of hard and fast rule that you like to go by for your members?
There's no hard and fast rule. I mean, I think, at the heart of it, it has to work for the person. So, for example, one thing to note is if you do salary sacrifice into super, you are effectively locking your money up until at least age 60. So if you have competing goals, so for example, if your primary goal is to pay down debt or to save for your children's education, then salary sacrificing into super may not actually be what you choose to do at that particular time. But if you work with a financial advisor, they can really help you get clarity on your goals and your priorities. And so over time, those goals and priorities naturally will change as you move through different life stages. But I think, the earlier you start, the better. So even if someone starts with putting a little bit into super, it might be $10 a week. You're probably not going to miss $10 a week. That's like 2 coffees.
That's a good way to look at it, actually. And all of a sudden, as soon as it happens for a couple of weeks, it will be completely kind of out of mind, out of sight, out of mind. And then suddenly you retire in 20, 30 years and that $10 a week extra.
And you'd be so glad you did that.
Yeah.
All the way back then. Like one of the best things you've ever done for yourself.
Yeah. Jessica, I know that you and Canna are obviously both very passionate about superannuation and about salary sacrificing. Can I ask you about cash though? Can I ask you about kind of using this as an opportunity to build up your kind of your cash reserves, or maybe it's better to look at it as your emergency money?
Michael, I'm so glad you raised this point because I think building up a cash reserve is actually a really underutilized strategy. So what I see a lot of clients do is they might have put extra money that they have into the mortgage and then they use their redraw facility if they need to access funds. Now, that may not be the best idea because when you're accessing a redraw, you're actually extending your debt and therefore how much interest you're paying on that loan. Whereas a cash reserve is really a totally different thing. It's set aside to be that emergency fund, readily accessible. So in terms of how much you should have as a cash reserve, it's really a personal preference. But I think if you think about it in terms of how much would I want or need to have if I needed to travel interstate or overseas in an emergency because one of my family members had passed away, or if I need to service the car or pay for a big medical bill, something like that. So, a common rule of thumb is about 3 months of income, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that much. I have clients that say, look, I'm quite comfortable with a cash reserve of $5,000 or $10,000.
And I suppose it's a bit of a misnomer, I suppose, to think of it as just strictly cash, because I was joking about putting it under the mattress, and that is probably the worst thing you could do. You're much better putting
Don't
it into.
do that.
I love that kind of just very firm advice. Don't do what Michael has advised you to do. Put it into an offset account or something like that instead.
All right, whilst we're talking about Michael's ridiculous idea of stashing money under his bed,
That seems harsh.
where do you stand when it comes to investing out of superannuation? Do you tend to have a bias towards prioritising super first, or do you like the idea of doing both? Or do you think for some people, they should prioritise investing sooner rather than later? Like, what are your thoughts and feelings around this?
So, Ken, I think if we talk about investing, whether that's inside or outside super, everyone should start thinking about what they could do from a very early age. Then it's working out what is the best course of action for you at that particular time. So, for example, if you are younger and you're not going to be retiring for a few decades, investing all of your surplus income into super probably isn't going to be the best idea because it's not going to be accessible. And I think a really great example of that is, for younger people who might be looking to buy their first home, aside from using the First Home Super Saver scheme to actually help with their deposit, leaving that aside, would you invest all of your surplus money into super? No, because you can't access it until you're at least 60. So that's then going to be a conflicting goal. But if you look at, say, other people who might want the best of both worlds, where they want supers for the long term, so it's set and forget, as Michael said, but then they want to invest outside super because your money's still growing, you get to control how you invest it, how much or how little risk you take on, you can add to it, you can withdraw from it, that's also a good option. So there's no one size fits all. It really depends on your individual circumstances and what you're wanting to achieve.
What about then, and another option for, you actually kind of mentioned this at the start, Jessica, when you said that some people are going to need to use these tax cuts and that little bit of extra money in order to just help them get by in a cost of living crisis. Linked to that, I suppose, is debt as well, and that debt that might have been building up through this period, and whether it's kind of your toxic kind of credit card debt or other forms of debt. Where do we prioritize that in terms of using that tax cut money? Is paying off debt kind of high on the agenda?
Look, again, it might be, and there are three types of debt: the good, the bad, and the ugly. So if we start with the ugly debt, that's non-deductible debt like credit card debt that you built up to fund your cost of living. And I get that, for some people, given inflation and how much things have just increased in price, they might not have had any option but to put things on a credit card. But if you do have credit card debt, absolutely start with paying off whatever debt has the highest interest rate, and generally that is credit cards. Mm-hmm. Then there's, what we would call good debt. So that might be debt against your principal residence mortgage or debt that's tax deductible, so an investment property, or if you borrowed to invest in shares or that kind of thing. So you might not necessarily want to pay down that debt if it's giving you a tax benefit. But in terms of your family home, obviously there are financial considerations. So, if you pay down debt, that you're going to save on the interest, and interest rates, even if they're variable rates, are pretty much a known quantity, whereas interest rates or whatever earning rates you're going to get in your investments, it's not a known quantity. So there's that you have to weigh up. But then there's also the psychological aspect of paying down debt, which, a lot of people don't really place enough weight on. And that is, if you do pay down debt, generally it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because people feel better about paying down debt. That motivates them to then pay down more debt and to save. So I think it can actually lead to bigger and better things in the long term.
Jessica, my biggest fear for Australians right now is that these pay rises, essentially let's call them a pay rise now because that sounds a little bit more exciting than a tax cut. They kick in and, 3 months later, everyone's scratching their head again going, where's all my money going? That dreaded toxic lifestyle creep has kicked in. How can you recommend someone be on top of this and avoid that lifestyle creep kicking in? Should they be changing their mortgage repayment plans by the new amount of extra money that they're going to be owning? Or should they be increasing their automatic savings plan? Or should they be reviewing their budget and going, hey, well, I've got an extra $50 per week now to put towards the family grocery bills? Like, how do we make sure that we have our finger on the pulse with this?
Sure. So, Canna, I think, it really goes back to my 3 principles of saving or investing. So the first is start early. So that's now. So take action straight away. The second is make it automatic. So if you are deciding that salary sacrificing into super is the best course of action for you, or if it's paying down debt, make it automatic. Siphon it off from your pay into a separate bank account or your mortgage or whatever, so that you don't have to think about it. And the other thing is make it regular. So instead of, saving that surplus in your bank account and then, chucking a big lump sum off the mortgage or putting a big lump sum into super, small bits regularly really do help. So start early, make it regular, and make it automatic.
Just like cleaning your teeth. You don't think about it, you just do it. It's a habit.
Pretty much.
A healthy habit.
I don't know if we've ever used a toothbrushing analogy on this, and it only takes you 2 minutes. I don't even know if that's right, actually. It's a salary sacrifice.
To brush for 2 minutes, and I know that because I've just come back from the dentist after a 2-hour appointment.
It feels like we are spiraling kind of out of kind of the range of what we were talking about today. Jessica, can I just make one observation? And I think this is, I like the fact that even though you work with UniSuper, and that you're providing advice kind of within a super fund, that you clearly consider the big picture, that it is not just all about superannuation, that you're also kind of looking at debt. You are looking at the home loan. You are looking at other investments and things. It's actually a very nice kind of quite, what would you say, holistic kind of approach. Is that the right way to kind of, it makes it almost sound quite spiritual, doesn't it?
It is. I think holistic is a great way of describing it. It's holistic, it's comprehensive. And so, with UniSuper, we do offer a comprehensive advice service, and we do consider all of those different aspects. It's not just about superannuation. And like all other financial advisors, Canna and myself, we are bound by law to recommend what's in the best interest of our clients.
Oh,
and if it's not super, then we won't recommend it.
I feel so proud to be a financial planner right now.
The two of you together, like it's you two could just have your own podcast. It's just Financial Planners Unite or something like that. FPU. You know what you've also done, Jessica, very, very cleverly here today, is we always spring on our guests, and I should warn them in advance, but I'm not organised enough to do that. But we always ask at the end of the episode for a savings tip or a savings hack that might kind of help people get a little bit ahead. And I reckon you have actually nailed it with your 3 principles of saving that you went for before. What were they again? Start
saving early, make it regular, and make it automatic.
I love that. Start early, make it regular, make it automatic. That's right. And then Canna derailed us with toothbrushing.
Sorry, my bad.
Yeah, but it is a very, very simple, very effective way of looking at it. I think we've covered this very nicely. It is a good time of year to be doing this because everyone has a little bit of extra money. And as you said at the beginning of this, Jessica, it does not happen very often that people just get a pay rise without having to ask for it. And if you can kind of take this as a golden opportunity to make some changes now, at least consider what you're going to do with it. Just don't let it slip by and let your lifestyle kind of fill that extra bit of money coming into your pocket and take that away. Make the most of it now. Consider salary sacrificing into super. Consider your debt. Consider building up your cash reserves and building up your emergency supplies just in case something comes along that you were not expecting. Thank you so much, Jessica, for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on your show.
That was Jessica Louis, Senior Private Client Advisor at UniSuper, a supporter of this podcast. Canna, you look very happy right now.
Oh, just brilliant, wise, sensible advice for absolutely everyone.
Yeah, sage advice. Do you like that?
I do. I like that adjective.
Yeah, I'm going to use that, just like I'm going to steal Jessica's husband's saying that she shared us with earlier in the show. I'm sorry, Jessica, for doing that to you. Canna, how do we find you if people need more information from you?
The best place to get in contact with me is actually directly on Instagram at Sugar Mama TV or Canna Campbell Official.
And you can hear me every day with Sean Aylmer on Fear and Greed, Australia's best business podcast. Thank you for listening to How Do They Afford That? Remember to hit follow on the podcast. And actually, the best thing that you can do is tell somebody else, send them this episode and spread the word about How Do They Afford That? Thank you for your company. Join us again next week.